All right, let's get into this discussion now. The South African Democratic Teachers Union is once again calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to sign the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill into law. It comes as the new Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Gwarube, calls for the BELA Bill to be sent back to Parliament. The Democratic Alliance is concerned that the role of school governing bodies will be diminished. SADTU General Secretary, Xolani Fakude, and the African Christian Democratic Party Deputy President Wayne Thring joining us now for this discussion. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Mr. Fakude, I am twisting my words there over the title, your title, because I know the General Secretary of SADTU is Mugwena Maluleka. You'll forgive me for that. Let's start with you and the threat to strike if the president does not sign this into law. Firstly, why do you think the president is taking his time, perhaps applying his mind to this document?
Thank you very much, Xoli. Let me greet you. Let me greet the viewers. Let me greet Wayne as well. And yes, you are correct. I am not the General Secretary of SADTU. I am the head of his office, which is the Secretariat Officer. In our view, is that the BELA Bill, for it to get to where it is right now, it has taken at least 10 years. It has gone through the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces. It has gone through 2 public consultations. So that's 2 rounds of public consultations. And we believe that the only reason that the president is not signing the bill right now, because the bill was actually passed by the parliament on the 17th of May 2024. That was 223 votes versus 78. That is when it was passed. So the reason the president is not signing, in our view, it is because there is pressure from, amongst others, the Democratic Alliance, from other ill-minded organizations, including the Minister of Basic Education herself, who is saying that the bill must be taken back to the president. And we are saying that, Mr. President, we have been discussing this for 10 years now. It is time to sign the bill. The bill is transformative. It has got many issues that it is trying to address. And we are saying, therefore, the bill should be signed as soon yesterday. In our view, Xoli, the bill is transformative in its approach. It has got some serious recommendations on issues such as learner attendance, etc. But it is all about being about making education accessible not only to those who have, but also accessible to those who do not have. So we're saying, Mr. President, sign the bill as in yesterday.
Wayne Thring, let's bring you into the conversation. Let's start with the ACDP's attitude towards the BELA Bill. As it stands, are you happy with it being signed into law, or you feel that there still needs to be some tweaking?
Well, absolutely not. I think that the ACDP has been unequivocal in terms of its position with regards to the BELA Bill. Our former Member of Parliament, the Honourable Mari Sukas, has done a stellar job in terms of her advocating for the position of the ACDP opposing the BELA Bill in its current form. The ACDP has called for numerous reforms to the BELA Bill, and concerns that we have raised, I think essentially can be summarized into 2 or 3 perhaps key points. The first of which is Section 41 of the bill, Section 41, which gives the minister almost unfettered powers in terms of drafting policy, which would then be made almost legal without necessarily going through the parliamentary process, where members of parliament are able to scrutinize that particular policy before it is implemented. And so one, I think, is the unfettered powers that is given to the minister in terms of Section 41. The second is in terms of Section 39. Section 39 also is the undermining of the current powers that our Constitution gives to parents and school governing bodies. So what we see here in terms of Section 29 is the centralization of the bill, where your provincial officials or your provincial powers, education powers, would be able to determine the language policy, the admission policy, undermining the right of parents and school governing bodies to be actively involved in the education of their children. So this is not only the challenge that was raised by the ACDP, but also raised by the FW de Klerk Foundation and many others. And I think thirdly, the third challenge that we have is one with regards to participation. And while this bill may have been 10 years or so in the making, and it may have appeared to have gone through the two processes in the two houses, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, but we believe that the constitutional process of public participation has also been undermined. And this is the reason why we say this. It is said that some 8 provinces supported the BELA Bill, and one, the Western Cape, did not support, in terms of when it went to the National Council of Provinces and it had the round of participation through the NCOP. And that 8 of the provinces supported. But here's the challenge. In the Northern Cape, for example, some 80% during the public participation process in the Northern Cape, 80% of the attendees, 80% of those who attended the public participation process rejected the BELA Bill. Now, here you have 80% in the Northern Cape rejecting the BELA Bill, and yet the Northern Cape Provincial Legislature sends a message to the NCOP saying that they support it. So what this does is that certainly the public participation process, in listening to the public, in listening to the parents, in listening to the different stakeholders, has been undermined and ignored. This is not democracy. This is not a fair process. And certainly it opens itself to legal challenges, which the ACDP also will be considering.
Yeah.
Should this bill be signed by the president?
Sure. Hendrik Makaneta, let's bring you into the conversation. You are an education activist. I don't know whether you want to opine on what either of the two panelists have had to say, but I'd like for you to set the tone for us as to what the BELA Bill is meant to do here, because reading the text, it's quite clear what it seeks to do, and that is to transform the South African Schooling Act. Transform it in what way?
Well, you're correct. The BELA Bill seeks to transform the South African Schools Act. And of course, there are a number of clauses that have been proposed in the bill. And at this point, we should all know that public participation has taken place. And of course, the majority of people have approved, the bill. If you look at the bill itself, I think those who are opposed to the bill, the majority of them, or some of them, may have wanted their proposals to, appear in the manner in which they made them during the public participation process. But of course, that is not to be, because the National Assembly has got its own way of drafting and crafting this bill. But I want to say that perhaps the president should also take the time to read all of those clauses which are contested by different parties. I think the DA is the leading party in this case, along with the ACDP and others, to look at particularly the maritime education. I think that the president should get legal advice to check whether that particular clause will be able to stand constitutional test. Because if you look at our constitution, we all know the constitution is the supreme law of the country, and that any law or conduct that is inconsistent with the constitution is invalid. So we don't want a situation whereby the constitutional court at some point may set aside, some of the clauses or the entire bill simply because, there was no, the president did not, satisfy himself, especially with regards to, mother tongue education, because the Constitution does allow it, that mother tongue education should take place. And of course, the bill might deal with that if you look at the powers that will be given to the HOD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Fakude, let's come back to you. Wayne Thring brings something that, frankly, is concerning. It's disconcerting because if a province, as he says, the Northern Cape, the public participation, 80% of the participants are rejecting the bill, yet the province, through its legislature, says the bill is good to go. What does that tell us about the public participation process and whether or not it is flawed?
Well, I think, Xoli, what Wayne is doing in this case is actually contesting the democratic process of on its own. We believe that the bill actually has gone through all the necessary democratic processes that are dictated to by the legislation, how we formulate legislation in this particular country. The fact of the matter is that 8 provinces agreed to the bill, except one being the Western Cape. Now, in terms of the dynamics, or in terms of the semantics as to who then participated in terms of percentage, etc., it becomes immaterial because the report that comes to the NCOP, ultimately, it says that 8 provinces out of 9 actually accepted the bill. In fact, let us take it further to even the National Assembly, whereby 223 votes were for the bill and 78 were not for the bill. So what I would want to emphasize in this particular case, or what we would want to emphasize as SADTU, is that the bill has gone through all processes. It can never be called that 10 years later, we come back and say that the bill has not gone through one process or so, and we start questioning the legislative processes. Then we should have questioned them all along. By the way, the Democratic Alliance was part of those who voted in the 78. Yes, I know that Wayne is not from the Democratic Alliance, but part of the 78 that voted against the bill was actually from the DA. So they have been participating in this process all along. Now, what we are saying is that it is unfair that 10 years later, we delay this particular bill after it has gone through all the processes, including 2 rounds of public. By the way, the second round of public consultations was called for by the very Democratic Alliance, and they were defeated through a democratic process. Now, what we will be doing, Xoli, if I may just add quickly, what we will be doing as SADTU is that we are engaging all the organizations that are like-minded. We have got a lived experience of how parties such as the DA tend to, through the back door, somehow overturn decisions that are taken at the level of the legislation after democratic processes. And we will be engaging these particular organizations and seeing if there is a possibility of even a mass protest. We went through this when we went through the Copyright Amendment Bill. We are seeing some resilience right now through the National Health Insurance bill as well. So we have seen this before. We have seen this movie before. But what we will do is that we are going to protect the democracy and the democratic processes of this particular country, especially as they're dictated to by Parliament. And in our view, Wayne here in this case would be wrong. This particular bill has gone through all the processes, public consultations, and therefore we are saying, Mr. President, sign it. We insist on that.
Yeah. I think we have lost Wayne Thring for a moment there. We'll see if we can get him back. But let me come to you then, Hendrik Makaneta. The president has a minister of basic education in the form of Siviwe Gwarube. She comes from the Democratic Alliance. She's clear. Mr. President, send the bill back to Parliament. There are fixes that are needed. The president has her as a cabinet member. He can't not listen to his minister, but he, at the same time, has got to get, I would want to think, the backing of all of cabinet. Do you think the president finds himself between a rock and a hard place? Is it a catch-22 for the president here?
Not at all, Tony. I think that you are right. Let me start by saying that Minister Gwarube, it is within her rights to make, this proposal that the bill should be referred back to the National Assembly. She does have that right because she is the incumbent of the Basic Education Department.
Yeah.
And of course, I think what would rather happen is perhaps the president should be in a position to have a meeting with the minister, whereby the minister can highlight some of the issues. But of course, these issues are known. We know what the issues are, and the only thing that I think must happen is that the president, as I said earlier on, should be able to get that advice in terms of those clauses that are being contested, because failure to do that, even if he can sign the bill into law, 1/3 of the National Assembly can still contest the bill in the Constitutional Court. And of course, if the Constitutional Court can find that, the clauses that the opposition parties are complaining about, if they can find that those clauses are inconsistent with the Constitution of the Republic as adopted in 1996, then the court, can either set aside the bill as it stands, or they can set aside some of those clauses, and allow, just like it happened recently with the National Health Insurance Act, which has now been adopted into law. So
Yeah.
I think, it's a matter of a phone call. I don't think that the president should really, they can even have a conversation telephonically to say, what is the way forward? But what is important, only is that at the end of the day, we must be able to prioritize, education of our children. I'm glad that even political parties agree with some of the clauses. They don't contest all of them. Those clauses such as where grade R will be compulsory. And of course, there was a bone of contention in relation to homeschooling, the regulation thereof.
Yeah.
But I think that we are moving towards unity, and there's consensus that a regulation must take place to ensure that when people say we are teaching, someone must come and verify whether indeed that is taking place.
Yeah. Wayne Thring, you are back. Let me pose the question to you. I'll tweak the question that I posed to Mr. Makaneta. He brings into the equation the particular sections of the bill. Is there anything for the ACDP that you feel, in terms of these clauses, that perhaps stands out for you as needing amendment? If not, what then could be the drawback, or what is delaying the president from signing this bill? Could it be that he has to at least be seen to be agreeing with his education minister? Again, I emphasize this point. This is a minister who is in his cabinet. Surely the two can't be seen to be disagreeing, or am I wrong?
Well, it shouldn't be, but obviously the situation that we have is a very unique situation as a result of the ANC losing a large majority, 70 seats, and now reduced to just 40% of the vote in the elections, and so the ANC is now forced to be able to have to speak and to negotiate with its partners within the GNU. Let me say very clearly that we seem to be conflating the ACDP with the DA, and the ACDP has actually been the champion party in terms of our opposition to the BELA Bill, where initially we thought that the DA was actually in agreement with the BELA Bill, and then later on, when the swing of things started to move away from I think in terms of public perception, where the vast majority of the public began to oppose the BELA Bill, then we started to see the DA coming over to the position of the ACDP, although in terms of rejecting the BELA Bill, although I think that the reasons for rejecting the BELA Bill are different. Now, you asked the question, what is it that the ACDP would like to see? I mentioned Section 41, which gives the minister unfettered power. And here the concern is that, the minister is able to determine policy, and then that particular policy almost becomes law. That particular policy becomes regulation, and it has to then be accepted by the education systems and the schools. Now, one of the concerns here, for example, is your pregnancy management policy that schools have. Currently, you have learners as young as, or children, let me put it this way, children as young as 12, who in terms of the Constitution are able to have an abortion without parental consent. Now, this is within our Constitution. The Constitution allows a girl child to have an abortion as young as 12 years old without the parental consent. Now, if this particular policy gets brought into the schools, then the ACDP obviously would have a problem with it. This is one of the reasons why the ACDP has called the BELA Bill the abortion bill, because there is the possibility for what is currently within the Constitution now to enforce teachers to allow for this particular aspect of abortion on demand to children as young as 12 without parental consent to take place. So that's I think the one thing. I think secondly also, when we look at some of the aspects of the curriculum, for example, comprehensive sexuality education, the ACDP has had a huge concern with regards to CSE. And we believe that comprehensive sexuality education has no place in our schools. What place does CSE have in teaching grade R learners, children even as young as 4, 5, 6, how to engage in sexual activities, how to please themselves, how to have anal sex and oral sex? This is within the CSE document. We need to understand also when the former Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, wished to introduce and piloted the project, the CSE, within the curriculum. Some of our schools actually were pilot schools. They were pilot projects where CSE was being introduced into the curriculum. This is nothing but an immoral intrusion on our children. So these were some of the concerns. So certainly I think Section 41, which gives the minister almost unfettered powers to introduce certain policy. And then I think also Section 29, as I indicated. Section 29 also of the bill undermines your school governing bodies, and the right to educate children must go back to the parent. The parent has a constitutional right to bring up their children in the way that these parents actually see fit. And then lastly, let me come back to the public participation process. I think it was Mr. Fakude who indicated that, if we have a problem with the democratic process, then there's a problem in a sense with the ACDP. But it's precisely because the democratic process is being flouted. Our Member of Parliament, Honourable Sukas, had to fight within the Portfolio Committee to actually see the results of that public participation process, because within the Portfolio Committee, it was being withheld. The public participation, the results of the public participation process was being withheld from the committee itself. And the ACDP had to fight for that public participation process to be exposed or to be tabled.
All right.
And so this is why we say it cannot be right where within a particular province you have some 80% of those who participated in that particular process objecting to the BELA Bill, but then your legislatures ignore the democratic process. And that democratic process says that public participation, particularly when it comes to legislation, is a must in terms of our Constitution. And so what we are challenging is the constitutional and the democratic process, which in view of the ACDP has been undermined, has been eroded, and it cannot be so. And then maybe lastly, on the homeschoolers, homeschoolers, we have found also in the basic education department, the minister herself indicated at the time that there was no proper research that was being done into the effect that the legislation in the BELA Bill would have on the homeschooling. So there was no proper research being done in terms of the effect of the bill on homeschooling. The vast majority, 90 if not 100% of the homeschoolers who participated in the process objected to the BELA Bill because they felt that their rights as parents to bring up their children in a manner which is fit and in accordance to their norms and their values is being undermined. And these particular parents, in terms of the bill, can actually be criminalized. We cannot criminalize parents who want to protect and bring up their children according to their values.
Mr. Fakude, so many objectionables from the ACDP. Is the president justified in taking his time then?
Well, Xolani, I can tell you now that the president has taken his time already. The bill was passed in Parliament on the 17th of May, 2024. So, and that is after 10 years of a process. So, no, the president is not justified to take any more time in terms of this particular bill. But then I must also address one thing that is being raised by Wayne from the ACDP. The bill does not only speak about, amongst others, teenage pregnancy, learner pregnancy, etc., but there are 56 clauses. 56 clauses that are being proposed that are meant to actually sort of transform the space within which we work as an education or as a basic education sector. So what we are saying is that no, the president is not justified to take any further delays. The president should sign the bill. What is important also, Polly, is to remember that this is after a process. It is not necessarily something which just randomly happened and we just decided to come up with a bill. It came after a process, and I must honestly also remind Wayne that as much as he gives an example of how in the Northern Cape 80% said no, I will also remind him and say that in the recent SONA debate, the Premier of Gauteng, which is one of the largest economic provinces, if not the economic drivers of the country, actually called on the president to sign the BELA Bill, and that was the Premier of Gauteng. So it does not mean that when one thing happens in a province like Northern Cape, and therefore it must be a blanket approach kind of. We are saying that the president is not justified to delay any longer. That is why right now, as I speak, we are engaging like-minded organizations to see if we can even consider a mass protest, because we have got a lived experience of this. And if it means that we must use those tactics to push the president to sign the bill, because we believe that the bill has gone through 10 years of consultations, 2 rounds of public consultations, it can never then be that we delay this bill. This bill is meant to transform. It speaks of many other issues, Polly, including grade R, including learner responsibilities, including code of conduct, including corporal punishment, the banning thereof, etc. 56 clauses. Let us not focus only on one clause and therefore think that the bill in its entirety is not correct. We are saying the bill has gone through the proper democratic processes as dictated to by our country's constitution, and therefore the bill must be signed.
Mr. Makaneta, in less than a minute, the impact of the delays.
Yeah, I think that the ACDP is mistaken to say that the bill is an abortion bill, and that has been their, they've been contesting all along, saying it's an abortion bill. They must show us one clause where the bill talks about abortion. It's not there. There's nothing like that in the BELA Bill. Of course, the Termination of Pregnancy Act was adopted some years back, which allows a 12-year-old girl to terminate without the consent of the parent. And secondly, the issue of the powers of the SGB being transferred or taken to the head of department. It does not mean that the head of department will have absolute powers. The decisions that are taken by the HOD can still be contested. I mean, as I said earlier, the constitution of our country is the supreme law of the country. Even those who may not agree, once the president signs the bill into law, they're still welcome to contest it in the Constitutional Court, where the court can be able to pronounce itself. And lastly, homeschooling is very important because currently, there's not been regulation. If you say you are teaching from home, someone must oversee your work in terms of protecting the children, in terms of the Children's Act. We cannot assume that you are doing the right thing. We cannot assume that you are molding these learners, young people, into better or people in the future. Someone must really see, just like teachers are being monitored from time to time, someone must monitor those who teach from home.
All right.
In terms of this homeschooling.
Hendrik Makaneta is an education activist. Thank you for your contribution to this discussion. Mr. Fakude there, Xolani Fakude, is with the union SADTU, a secretariat in the GS's office, and Mr. Wayne Thring, a deputy president of the political party, African Christian Democratic Party. Thank you all for your contribution to this discussion.